Sorry. Hello and welcome to today's program, or this evening's program, Pyonghattan, Escapees from North Korea's capital. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Tom Byrne. I'm the president and CEO of the Korea Society. Before we get started, I would like to thank the Korea Foundation and our corporate sponsors for making this program possible, the names and logos of which are displayed on the screen in the elevator lobby on the 24th floor. Today's program is a really special one. We're delighted to be joined by our amazing speakers who will share their extraordinary experiences and perspectives during this evening's conversation, which aims to shed light on a range of issues related to North Korea's state and society. It's my pleasure to introduce them. First, I'd like to welcome Seohyun Lee. Seohyun was born in Pyongyang and then moved to China with her family, where she attended university. And I also just learned that she'll be attending university in New York City at Columbia University Graduate School. She now works with NGOs to inform the international community about North Korea and advocates for human rights. Thanks for joining us, Seohyun. Next, we have Hyun-Seung Lee, Seohyun's brother, who worked in China for a North Korean state trading firm before departing with his family for the United States. Hyun-Seung now consults for several Washington, D.C. think tanks and NGOs. Welcome, Hyun-Seung.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Liberty in North Korea President and CEO, Hana Song. Hana focuses, Hana focuses on building international support for the North Korean people, providing direct assistance to North Korean refugees, and developing people-focused strategies to accelerate positive change. So great to have you with us, Hana. The moderator for today's program is the Korea Society's Policy Director, Jonathan Corrado. I will now turn the mic over to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Tom. And this is a special program. I'm really looking forward to this. Thanks so much to our audience who came here tonight in person. Great to have an in-person community together again. And also for all the people who signed up online, 400 people signed up to watch this thing live. So hello to everybody watching virtually as well. Please send your questions in. We're taking them live to policy@koreasociety.org. Our in-house audience can do that too. Our viewers at home can do that as well. And we will have a chance for audience questions at the end of the program. So please start thinking about that and look forward to hearing you at that juncture. So without further ado, I want to get started. So Hyun, let's kick off with you.
Sure.
And in this first round, we'll talk about life and experience in North Korea. In the next round, we'll move on to China, sort of mirroring the way that your life developed, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your life growing up in Pyongyang, maybe not typical average upbringing, right? And then you attended Kim Il-sung University, the premier elite university in North Korea. So tell us a little bit about your experience there, how society was evolving at the time, and how you look at it now that you're here in America and in a very different situation, right? You probably have a new view on what everything meant as you experienced it back then.
Yes. So I was born and grew up in Pyongyang. So my experience as a North Korean is atypical from the conventional narratives in America about North Koreans. I never suffered from hunger or was a victim of woman trafficking in China. I had the best education that North Korea could offer to its citizens. So I went to Hyunsung Academy, which is well-known school for the First Lady of North Korea research attended, and I studied at Pyongyang Foreign Language School, studied English and Chinese over there. And then between 2008 to 2010, I studied at Kim Il-sung University. So I went to China in 2010 to study abroad, and I was one of very few North Korean students who had the diploma from foreign universities. So before I arrived in China, I believe that the life and experience I had in North Korea was the best around the world because that's what I was constantly brainwashed by the regime. But after arriving in China, I realized that I was deceived. But at the beginning, I was just shocked by the different life quality and styles of Chinese people, and they don't really realize that the problem of the society at the beginning.
Right.
Of course, I was young at the time, and then everything was new, so I was just in a stage of be amazed by the different life in China. So if I can tell that what is the biggest thing that probably we can tell apart from our previous that parents era. So no matter whether they had like what kind of lifestyles in North Korea, our parents kind of if they believe that their good fortunes and the family power came from the great leaders
Hmm.
generosity. Our young generation don't think that way. We think that that is something our grandparents and parents
Right.
earned it through their hard work and great efforts. So um, yeah, after experiencing different like countries, what I can tell is clearly tell is that North Korean Pyongyang millennials, they love their country, but they do not love or support the Kim Jong Un regime.
Really fascinating. And thank you for letting us steal your title of your YouTube channel, Pyonghattan, for the title of this program. And I think it hits on a really important dynamic, which is this Jangmadang Shide. Can you
Mhm.
tell us what does Jangmadang Shide mean?
I think it mainly is about the people who um, experienced the arduous march in late 90s in North Korea, whether they are like their young age or they just born during that era. So they never experienced that probably the free distribution from the government, and everything was like self-resilience.
Right.
So we call them that 장마당 시대, who never really get the benefit of the socialism system.
Right. Right. A market generation.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. So, Hyunsung, over to you, and just
Okay.
hoping to learn a little bit about your childhood growing up, and also just were you aware growing up of your dad's job?
Uh-huh.
Because you would later go into that line of work, right? And so maybe you could tell our guests here a little bit about that.
All right. First of all, thank you for Korea Society and the society leadership, Jonathan, Aaron, inviting us, and it's my privilege to speak in this wonderful event. And I think my like childhood memory is just schooling. Early morning, go to school, and late night come back school. Come back home, because North Korea has no like very ideal transportation system. So you have to wait like 1 or 2 hours to take a bus, and sometimes you have to walk from home to school. Like it takes more than 1 hour. So I think everybody in North Korea are very strong and love to work. And some people made a joke that, oh, people living in high building, that if there's no electricity, they will have automatic diet. So,
That's a good
but
workout right
yeah,
there,
good
getting that top
workout. So
floor. Yeah.
yeah, and then I went to same school with my sister, because I mean the school I went is we went was the top schools in North Korea. And then I think from that moment it is categorized or classified, as a elite class and like public or like middle class, like that. But um, the lifestyle of Pyongyang residents and other big cities are like relatively high by North Korean standard, but still compared to U.S. and South Korea, it's middle class, you know, um,
Right.
quality. And my high school was the school teaching foreign languages, so that's we learned English and my sister learned Chinese. And if you went to school, they're all like kids from the elite class, and their dads are fathers. I mean the uncles and grandparents are all like top leaders of North Korea. So you were like incorporated in this environment. So you are apart from the general public's the life. So you are isolated by the information of true information of North Korea. So I volunteered to join the military, and I served more than 3 years. And there was a two like shocking memory of military service. So I think I told one time in the event, and the first day of my camp, and then I saw 9 my senior members who lost 2 fingers, and then I heard that from another senior member that they cut them by themselves because the military service is so hard, and then they cannot endure the service, so they cut themselves because they can discharge from the military. And another one was after a year service, and then I had a chance to talk with my junior member just to join the military. And then I asked him, are you satisfied with the military life and the quality of the food? And then he said that he's very satisfied. And then I asked him why. He said that at least I had a 3 days a meal. And then, what do you have meal? I mean, how many meals do you have a day? And then he told me that in his home, he had 2 meals a day. So it was like 2003 and 2004. So I was shocked. And that kind of, experience made me how to view the society, not just, elite class, but also you have to look the people's life. So
So
that
the
was
military was your first exposure to other classes of people.
pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. Before like military service, we went to, a local like farming place to help farming,
Right.
like just 20 days, 1 month. But at the time we was too young, and then we couldn't realize was
Right.
that the normal people's life.
Right. So what you just talked about was like a labor mobilization, right? Could you tell, maybe people aren't familiar with what a labor mobilization is? And before we were speaking, Seohyun, and you mentioned that even at Kim Il-sung University, you were mobilized to do some
Yes.
labor. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
There's too many of those kind of mobilizations. So I was a like farmer, I was a labor, and I was also one of the performers at the national event as well. I was studying at Kim Il-sung University, so the actual time I was sitting in the classroom and committed my time to study was less than a year.
Wow.
Yeah, and like for my seniors, they spend only more than just 1 year during their whole 4 year college life to study, and they are always being mobilized. So, there are so various reasons. In spring and the autumn season, they mobilize students for farming. And then whenever there is a national event, like the September 9th and October 10th, those party events, then they also mobilize students for the performance. So they almost commit like more than 6 months for the performance. So let's say if the events is held on September 9th, then you start to practice that performance from March.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any memories,
Yeah,
Hyun-seung,
let me
about
add
that?
some points. So we have here Pyonghattan. So
Yeah.
we assume that those high buildings are constructed by the workers, professional workers, but actually it was constructed by the students and then soldiers and then Pyongyang citizens. So this is the mobilization of the North Korean Workers' Party. So they build it by these unprofessional labors. And then, like for example, the students, they have a 4 years or 5 years of curriculum, but they're mobilized to this forced labor, and then they have to study like 7 years or
Right.
like 8 years.
Mhm.
So eventually, you have 2 extra years for forced labor.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like Kim Il-sung University, to make an analog for our American situation, it'd be like students at Harvard University being dragged out of classrooms and forced to participate in rice planting, right? Like that's how severe this case is. And no insulation from that, even though you're belonging to an upper class. Okay, so Hannah, I want to turn over to you, and hoping that you could just Maybe first tell us a little bit about Link, the organization that you're a part of and that you are the leader of, and also maybe a broad perspective because you meet North Korean refugees from all walks of life
Mhm.
in the course of doing your work, which is helping people to make their way to freedom
Mhm.
and then doing education to a wide audience.
Mhm.
So hoping that you could just provide some perspective and a little bit of your own personal experience as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and to be here amongst such prestigious speakers. Liberty in North Korea, we are an international NGO. We're based here in the United States with an office in Seoul, South Korea. But the crux of our work is really just focused on the North Korean people and ultimately how we can work together with the North Korean people to not only help individuals to escape and reach freedom, but to someday see 25 million North Korean people be free. And so our work, I would say prior to COVID, much more active in sort of what we call the modern day underground railroad, helping North Korean refugees escape, reach countries like South Korea and the United States, and then providing them with support in their resettlement. And so obviously much of that has come to a halt as a result of the pandemic, with the border shutdowns being very extreme, very little movement happening across these borders. And so we are focusing on the community of defectors that have already escaped and how we can develop their capacity further to work together with us as agents of change. Some of the North Korean defectors like Seohyun and Hyunsung are some of the most effective, not only people to share about their experiences, but of course to work side by side in being advocates to help change and develop strategies for how to accelerate change in North Korea. And the last part of the work that we really focus on is a combination of sort of what we call changing the narrative. And a lot of stuff falls within this bucket, right? The typical perspective on North Korea. If you were to go out on the street and ask somebody what they think of when they hear the word North Korea, it's usually Kim Jong Un or nuclear weapons. Very rarely is it North Korean people or human rights or refugees. And so the work we do is really focusing on how do we change the way the world views North Korea and also redefine it by the North Korean people? And that's critical because if people don't realize, that there is anything that can be done on this issue, then it continues to remain this sort of hopeless, unchanging type of a situation. But in fact, there has been a lot of change, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, today in various forms. And some of the work we're doing is how can we get more information and technology into North Korea to the hands of the North Korean people to become more aware of the outside world, and again, eventually to be able to be in a position where they can determine their own future. And so that's the work that we do at Liberty in North Korea. And through that work, we've had the privilege of helping over 1,300 North Korean refugees escape and reach freedom and resettle and start new lives. And in the course of doing that work, we've been able to interact and meet so many different types of people from North Korea. And I think Hyunsung and Seohyun have already touched on this, but what I think sometimes we forget is that North Korea is not a monolith. Not everybody will have their experiences, or not everybody's experience will be like just that of a North Korean woman that was trafficked in China, or somebody who experienced severe famine and watched family members starve to death. In fact, so many of these regions and provinces and areas in North Korea are so siloed from one another, like Hyunsung's experience, they're not even aware of what's happening in adjacent or other parts of the country. So when we have this program, a fellowship where we bring North Korean advocates together, one of the most interesting things for me is always when they just sit down and talk and get to know each other. They learn so much even from each other about the same place that they've come from, about North Korea. And it's always fascinating to sit on the sidelines and to just get to hear about their perspectives and attitudes and how they're so vastly different. And so I think through that, we've been able to also see that there are also different parts of North Korea where change is happening at a different pace. And so one of the outcomes of the famine that Seohyun referenced earlier was this grassroots marketization and sort of some of these social, economic, and information changes that really began proliferating about 2 decades ago. Over the last 20 years, we've really seen the North Korean people both promote and create and push for these changes. So what does that mean? Whereas the people used to depend on the government for food, now they depend on these markets that have popped up. And so the these are very important trends and changes, and these changes are happening at a different rate in different parts of the country. And so that's very important, not only for our work, because our end goal is ultimately how do we contribute more to accelerating some of these changes in North Korea until we can ultimately see an open and free North Korea, but also especially from the experience of understanding that everyone's experience is so different, and depending on where you live in any sort of a non-democratic country or society, change will never happen at an equal rate. And so it is important for us to understand the way people think so differently, the lives they experience, and how their experiences are different, even generationally. And so I think that was what you were referencing before, was the 장마당 세대, and that's 장마당 is North Korean word for markets, the market generation. So the equivalent of that is they're North Korean millennials. And so if we know anything about our millennials here, they're curious, they are entrepreneurial, they're creative, and it's no different actually in North Korea. And so we actually made a documentary, you can find it for free on YouTube in 10 languages, called The Jangmadang Generation. And it talks exactly about and interviews these accounts from North Korean youth about how different their experiences are and how they have been the author of some of these changes.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And fantastic overview of the kind of stuff that your organization is doing, so important, and introduction to a lot of concepts that we're going to get a chance to dig into a little bit further. And speaking of information distribution, we have sitting in our audience right here, Jian Beck, who is president of Lumen, an organization that is doing just that, devising creative ways to get information into North Korea. So plenty of opportunity to talk more about that kind of stuff. In round two, just like in the second phase of your life, you moved to China. So in round two of our questions, we'll move to China. So you went to Dalian to attend university. Can you tell us about your experience? You mentioned before that you started to have kind of an aha moment of, my life is not what I thought it was, right? When you were in there, you started to sort of break through a little bit of the regime propaganda and expand your mindset. So can you tell us about your experience in China?
Yes, of course. So my experience in China was, I'll say, kind of the most, I would say the most, one of the most valuable time in my lifetime. So I just want to share one quick story. One day I took a taxi and had a random conversation with a taxi driver. So after learning that I was from North Korea, the taxi driver asked me a question. Why Kim Jong-il, it was 2011, so why Kim Jong-il did not open up his border and give more opportunity to his people to live a better life? And I couldn't answer anything because I was just envying that Chinese people had a better quality of life and freedom to move around and own their private cars, but never thought about the fundamental reason why we don't have that freedom, why we cannot have a better life.
Right.
So his question lingered even after we ended the conversation. And then I started to kind of analyzing what I saw, what I experienced, and try to find out the answer why. And, even after I kind of learned that it is because of the system, and then because Kim family want to maintain their power, and so they pretend that not see the suffering of their people. But it is the place, it is your native country where your friends, relatives, and memories are. So I still had a hope that maybe my father and me, who had the foreign experience and can bring those knowledges and experience to North Korea and build a new society, maybe better society for everyone in North Korea. But in 2013, after I witnessed that my best friend and a roommate from the Chinese college, who was also a daughter of the high-ranking officer from the regime, dragged away in front of my eyes, that incident kind of changed the whole view. So my dad always told me that follow the rules and laws set by the government, then nothing bad is going to happen to you. And I believe that motto and I live with that motto my entire life as a North Korean citizen. But after experiencing that, the tragedy happened to my best friend. So her father was executed, and his only crime was that he was worked for Kim Jong Un's uncle, Chang Sung-taek. And that's all the reason. And her entire family was sent to political prison camp. And then I was so shocked and furious later. And then I felt like I lost myself. Like all the hope and passion and belief that I had in the regime kind of like all gone. And yeah, so I asked myself, what was the reason that I'm living as a North Korean? Because I always kind of passionate about making the North Korea a better place, influenced by my father, who is really like patriot. So, and that kind of led me to change my whole point of view. But still, and then I kind of like suffer from the dilemma that if I make a choice to leave the country with my family, then the relatives who is going to leave behind in North Korea are going to be get punished, and that's what called guilt by association. So your single word and action can punish the three generations of your family members, and the higher position in North Korea means the severe, strict punishment into your families. So we kind of hesitated, but after experiencing that, not countless my friends, my brother's friends, my father's friends, all the elite group are being executed for unreasonable account, we realized that we cannot ignoring this situation, and we should do something to correct this injustice society. But there is not much things we can do inside or even in China as a North Korean citizen. So we had a family group meeting outside of the home in China. So we drove to a park, one of the big park in Dalian city, and then left our phones in our car, and then had a family meeting together, and we made a decision to leave for, correct the problems, and just want to be like, we don't want to pass this kind of tragedy to our next generation.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you perceive a real danger, a real threat, given that your father's work related to Chang Sung-taek, and that could be an immediate consequence to your family?
Yes. So after witnessing that people are being executed for nothing that really they committed for wrong thing, we all know that we could be the next target anytime, just depending on the Kim Jong Un's mood.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Amazing. Okay, so Hyun-Seung, over to you. Your experience in China, and I know that you were working for a trading company, right? And can you tell us, maybe teach us a little bit about what your father was doing, what you were doing, what is Office 39, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, my sister described in time in China was very crucial, and then it's also a pivotal time for me. So I was a member of the North Korean Workers' Party. So I joined the membership at very early age. So I was so loyal. So I was listen to instruction that do not watch any South Korean dramas and South Korean news. So at the beginning, I didn't watch any South Korean news and dramas, but there's always temptation and people who share the information. So I gradually into the South Korean culture and news, also Chinese culture as well.
What was your early favorite Korean drama?
Yeah, exactly that time there was like Daejangum, the famous South Korean drama was so, spread out in China. So I think that was the first drama I saw in China. But in 2007, I joined the college program, and then the first thing I noticed was Chinese students can choose curriculum and the classes. And then I thought, it's very interesting. And because you know, it's impossible in North Korea. It's impossible you can choose your class and subject. So I thought that why North Korean regime let North Korean students, choose their subject, and then why they always choose something for us. And I realized that, this may be, freedom of choice. And the time flies, and then studied international trade and economics, and then I joined the North Korean trading company to help trade between China and North Korea. So I was managing ships and then national resources trade. So for 3 years, I guess I managed 300 times of shipping transaction and natural resources business. So during the business, I was struggled struggled many times, but the basic was North Korean business partners, they don't respect any agreement or contract. They think it's just a paper. And then even though they get front money and then they're not willing to pay back. And then when we talk to them, hey, we should pay back, it's the contract, international law. And then they don't respect any paper, international law, because they listen only regime's rule and order. And then the money is already contributed to the regime's project. So actually, the companies also had no money at the time, so they cannot pay back, and then keep delaying, and then eventually regime make a North Korean businessman as the liar, and then the people who don't keep the promises and contract to the Chinese partners. So as far as I know, none of Chinese companies made a profit doing business with North Korea. So, and my dad was in China to introduce market economy to North Korea. So he was the, open-minded, and he was the reformer. He wants to reform and open the country. And him and Kim Jong Un's uncle Jang Dong-taek was trying to introduce some level of market economy to North Korea. And because we believe that market economy can bring benefit to the people and improve people's life quality. So that's what they are trying to do. But as we all know, Kim Jong Un executed his uncle late 2013, and it was the big shocking moment, and to not just to us, to everybody in North Korea. So nobody expected Kim Jong Un actually executed his uncle. So at the time, I thought, it was kind of, many people thought that, it's not true. And then, later found out that two top associates of Jang Suk-tae was executed in front of many people. I think more than hundreds of people. So many generals and then party cadres watched the scene, very brutal scene. And so they were, stationed like with the wooden, stage, and then they used anti-craft gun to shoot them. So their whole body was gone, and then later they using fire flying project to burn it, and then they announced that these traitors are not entitled to bury in this sacred land. So they used tank to crash the laptops. So that's the scene they describe, and then couldn't shocked with this description. So, and then not just one or two general describe the scene, but like 4 or 3, the cadres we met, they also agreed the scene because they watched it. So that was the trigger and then shocking moment for entire my family. And another thing was the top cadres keep talking to my dad. We don't see any future in this country.
Mm.
We don't know where this country is going. So we believe that we have to make a decision. So finally, we make it happen to find the freedom.
What a difficult choice and an incredible risk, and I'm so glad that it's worked out, and we are the benefits of it, that you're able to be here today.
Thanks.
And so, Hannah, I want to talk to you a little bit about the vast majority of refugees are leaving North Korea and they have to go through China,
Mhm.
right? There's basically no other choice. You can run across the DMZ, but
Mhm.
that's a high roller, and not many can
Mhm.
successfully make that. What is a typical experience like
Mhm.
for refugees as they go through China? Because it can be pretty tough.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I referenced before, this is sort of what we've called in this issue the modern day Underground Railroad, because it's about a 3,000-mile journey, very difficult. It's 3,000 miles is further than the distance essentially between New York and LA. And these individuals are not jumping on a flight and landing in South Korea. They are crossing the river out of North Korea, and they're having to travel through China. And this is pre pandemic, of course. And they're having to travel through China, but remaining hidden because the Chinese government does not recognize North Koreans as refugees and instead cooperates with the North Korean government to actually hunt them down, arrest them, and then forcibly send them back. And if they are caught and sent back to North Korea, they face very severe punishment for having escaped illegally in the first place. So this journey throughout China is at times on different modes of transportation. It's always remaining hidden and always with the risk and the fear of potentially being caught. So what ends up happening oftentimes is if people don't have the resources or the means or the connections to an organization like Liberty in North Korea to get out, they may find themselves in situations of extreme exploitation. The trafficking of North Korean women are so prevalent, and at the peak of the refugee crisis in the mid-2000s, numbers were estimated to be something like 60 to 80% of female North Korean refugees were being trafficked. And there's been a whole plethora of issues associated to that. Women today who are still in China, they are in situations of being sold repeatedly to different men. They have children with these men, but the children are not recognized because North Koreans are not recognized in China, so these children are stateless. So all of these issues that have really come about as a result of sort of this refugee situation. But as North Koreans, if they manage to make their way out of China, they have to go all the way down to Southeast Asia. And there are some friendly countries there where they can then be processed to go on to South Korea, the United States. So again, they're traveling on foot at times, through mountains, through jungles. I think it's very difficult to fathom what it's like. I can share an anecdote about one of my favorite. They were probably the oldest individuals we helped to come through our escape routes. We called them Grams and Gramps. They were a couple that were in their mid-70s, actually. And they did this incredibly dangerous journey together, had been hiding in China for a number of years, and finally decided to do this very dangerous journey. So you can imagine, as you're on foot and traveling in the middle of the night, in the dark of the night, you really can bring one backpack. That's it. So you are uplifting your entire life, sometimes leaving without saying goodbye or saying anything to anybody with one bag. And so throughout the journey and getting to Southeast Asia and going up these mountains and through the jungle, they're throwing things out because the bag just gets too heavy. It's such a difficult journey. And by the time they met our team in Southeast Asia and we welcomed them into freedom, they said they saw Grams and Gramps in the distance as we were picking them up, and they were holding hands. And the group that was there with them said that they held hands the entire journey. And that the people in the group that they'd come with together had helped, carrying each other's bags, when you have women with small children or babies and older folks who need help with carrying their things. And so they made it all the way through. And when we were debriefing with them, the very funny thing was they were practically sharing one pair of glasses. I don't know what happened to the other glasses. They were sharing one pair of glasses, holding hands. And somehow Gramps had carried this entire bottle of baijiu or some hard Chinese liquor, managed to throw everything else out of the bag, but that was really precious because he wanted to make sure that when he made it safely, he could celebrate with that. And we asked, why at this point in your life did you decide to make such a dangerous journey? And he said, because I promised my wife that no matter what, we would live our last few years in freedom. And so, when they finally made it to South Korea, they actually had a daughter who had escaped previously and had gone to South Korea. And they called her and she didn't believe it was them. She thought somebody was pranking her, was scamming her, because she said there's absolutely no way that my parents in their 70s could have done this journey that I did and make it there. So it's a very difficult, dangerous journey. It's one that I don't personally think I would actually be able to make. And the risk is so incredibly high, as well as the potential punishment for being caught. And so I think when I look at the community of North Korean defectors and people who have successfully escaped, they are some of the most incredibly resilient and strong and brave people I've ever met, because of what they have been through and the calculations, the sacrifices that they've had to make to escape. And even for Hyun-Seung and Seohyun and their family, there were very real calculations they had to make in their decision to leave, because they know the consequences of what will happen to their family members who stayed behind.
Thank you so much. What an inspiring story of Gramps and Gramps. I'm going to pass that one on into the future and maybe drink a little bit of baijiu in his honor as well.
Pour some out for Gramps tonight.
Okay, so I want to talk about your family's journey and why you chose to come here in America and what you're up to now. So, Seohyun, over to you.
Yeah, so we first moved to South Korea, but the life in South Korea was very different from what we envisioned when we left China. Yes, we left for our freedom and the freedom for North Korean people. We wanted to fight against North Korean regime, but we constantly advised by the South Korean entities that never reveal your identity in South Korea from the discrimination, and your life is gonna much easier just revealing your identity. So, and then, yeah, and at the moment, I feel like there's tremendous risk we took on this journey kind of all in vain. So besides that as well, our family kind of threats from North Korean government, and then also those potential spies living in South Korea. So for these security reasons, we had to move to America, and we settled down America in 2016. And now I am engaging in human rights activities and also engaging in information dissemination with Lumen and also volunteering link work as well, and then running a YouTube channel to tell the international society about the reality of North Korea and tell the truth of the regime. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I applied for graduate school last year, and I just a week ago got the good news from many different programs. And then Columbia CPA was one of the school that accept me. So I am looking forward to my graduate studying in Manhattan. Soon.
Yeah, right on. Congrats. And we look forward to having you here a lot. And
thank you. I will stop by often.
thank you. Okay, Hyunsung, over to you.
Yeah, let me add some points why we moved to United States. There's some safety concern, like a family safety concern. So actually, North Korean regime put my grandma and uncle and aunt on North Korean TV show, so threaten us to not stay in South Korea, to come back to Pyongyang. So that's the biggest signal that we should not stay in South Korea. And then we know there are lots of espionage and spies in South Korea. And actually, when I was in China, one of my friend's friend who actually attended the Kim Jong Il political military academy, that was the academy which raids spy agencies. Many of the Korean watchers understand the university's purpose of the university. So that he was in China, and when I had several dinner together, and then he told me his mission is to go to South Korea, marry to Chinese woman, marry to Chinese woman, get the Chinese identity, and go to South Korea. And I was like shocked why they want to send you South Korea. So not just me, there are lots of people already went South Korea. And then, I was like, and then he had a wife and child in North Korea, and then they are kind of hostage. So
Wow.
he has no choice. So I told him, I really want to go. I mean, do you really want to go? And then he told me he doesn't. But later I defected, so I couldn't identify he is in China or like in North Korea. But usually North Korean spies in Southeast Asia, they already have the country's identity. They don't have North Korean passport. They are already citizen of Vietnam and Southeastern countries. So they can easily travel to South Korea and do some malicious activity against people. So that's one of the big reasons we moved to United States. And now I'm doing consulting for North Korean people and North Korean issue, and my main focus is peaceful unification based on principles and maybe free and united Korea. And I'm also working as fellow on North Korean studies at Global Peace Foundation. Yeah, they are promoting peace through principle-based, peaceful unification, and also working as a director at One Korean Network, which is the Korean American NGO delivering information to American public, overall Korean Peninsula information, and our main focus is to secure freedom in Korean Peninsula and protect free and democratic system in Korean Peninsula. So we are educating U.S. politicians about the Korean Peninsula. So from last year, personally, I met almost 30 members of Congress and senators in person, and I had a meeting with like almost 60 staffers to educate them, like why at this time, peace treaty is not available, why North Korean regime is not trying to engage with South Korea. So giving them more North Korean regime's response and North Korean regime's strategy. And the third one is, again, I'm a big fan of information and knowledge. So I'm trying to help North Korean people get more knowledge. So trying to get Jiun and other NGO which sends information to North Korea.
Excellent. Important work. You're a busy guy.
Yeah.
Hannah, refugee flows have been really impacted by COVID, right? But even before that, Kim Jong Un has been effective in reducing the amount of settlers who are able to come to South Korea, which hints that he's been really successful at shoring up the border and preventing defections in the first place. How do you see trends developing going forward?
Yeah, so to your point, at the peak of sort of when North Koreans were escaping and coming through at the highest point, there were probably about, over 2,000-3,000 North Korean refugees making it to South Korea and resettling there. There's no way for us to know how many are in China because we don't have permission to be there. No one is legally allowed to be there to observe or to identify how many North Korean refugees there are potentially in China. So we go based off of numbers that the South Korean government publicizes in terms of how many North Korean refugees make it there year over year. So when Kim Jong Un came into power, you see a huge drop by almost 40-50% in terms of the number of North Korean refugees making it to South Korea. And it's because, like you said, Jonathan, it's become a strategic priority for Kim Jong Un to really crack down on defections. He's begun to see the impact and the role that North Korean defectors play in these changes that are happening and keeping in touch with family members inside, getting information into the country, sending remittances. And so these are all very critical inputs that are promoting change in North Korea. And so that number has just slowly declined over the years. If you kind of look at a graph of the numbers of North Koreans arriving in South Korea, just steadily going down. So in 2019, there was just over about 1,000 North Korean refugees that made it to South Korea. And then 2020 was the pandemic. And so about 250 or so made it to South Korea that year. So that's a huge drop. And a lot of those folks were people who were already in the queue being processed to come through, because the border shutdowns once the pandemic started were incredibly extreme, almost impossible to leave through the same routes that people were leaving through before. In 2021, last year, the number of North Koreans that made it to South Korea, about 63. So it's been very difficult. And to be honest, it's hard to know when things will ever return or go back to what they were before, or even if they ever will. Right now, what we do know is that the border is still incredibly locked down. It's still shut. And we are not aware of individuals who have managed to come through that way. But people who are coming through, the few that made it last year, they were folks that were already in third countries, potentially people that had escaped previously, and more male than female, actually, which was an interesting change in the demographic. And that's because it was a number of people like laborers from Russia who were actually coming through. And so more unique, different types of cases than we typically were seeing pre-pandemic.
Really interesting. Hopefully that situation changes. So I want to get to two questions that we got from our virtual audience, and then I want to turn to our live audience. So please get your questions ready and prepared. So the two that I want to offer to our speakers right now, one's from Jong-un Lee from Radio Free Asia, and Jong-un asks, are there ways for you to keep in touch with family and friends back in North Korea? So that's question number two. Question number one. The next question comes from Neil Watts, who worked previously for the United Nations panel of experts on North Korea. And he wants to know if Office 39 has been involved in sanctions evasion, getting around sanctions. So it makes sense that it comes from a UN panel of experts member. Okay, so those are the two questions. So any thoughts on those before we turn to our live audience here?
Maybe I will jump in. And there are ways to maintain contact, the acquaintances and friends in China and North Korea. But as we all know, there's no internet in North Korea. So there's no private international call in North Korea. So it's impossible to, call or contact the people in North Korea inside. But some people can deliver our message to the family. And then I'll just, leave it there. Because some people still maintain contact through other people's help. So I don't want to say too detailed.
Right,
too much
of course.
detail.
Yeah, important to keep it secret to a certain
there are
extent.
friends, and then friends who are residing outside of Pyongyang or North Korea. We are communicating in encrypted messages, emails. Yeah.
Okay.
We can, but the thing is that we are okay because we already escaped. We are not under that regime's control, but we might put them in the risk.
Right.
So being careful with touching with them. So yeah, I mean, it is possible. I just want to leave it like that. Yeah, it is possible to reach out to them.
Right, gotcha.
So the second question was how? Okay.
Oh,
go
I'll
ahead.
just jump in really quickly
sure,
on
yeah.
that. So at least from North Korean defectors that we speak with, especially, there's a number of North Koreans who have escaped from the border area, so very close to China. And so one of the ways that North Korean defectors do keep in touch is through illegal Chinese cell phones that have been smuggled into the country. While there are domestic cell phones and a domestic cell phone network within North Korea, as Hyun-Seung said, those phones cannot make international phone calls. And there's no internet to connect to. But for people that live in the border region, because the cell phone tower in China is literally right on the border. If you ever see a photo, we have this photo that we show sometimes, the cell phone tower is practically on the river that separates China and North Korea. And so a few miles inward, you can still get cell phone reception if you smuggle these Chinese cell phones in. And so this is one of the ways in which people are able to actually contact family members inside through brokers, or sometimes through Chinese traders who are able to go back and forth, or through North Koreans who hide these phones, or will have access to them to be able to connect to the outside world. And what we've heard from folks who have family members more inland, that you clearly can't use a cell phone, they will utilize a broker who's in the border region. And actually, the broker will connect with somebody in the outside world with a Chinese cell phone, and then on their domestic cell phone, connect with somebody more inland, and will do sort of one of these things where they can communicate to each other in that way. So that's one of the ways in which and we actually created a video that talks a little bit about some of these networks into North Korea that you can also find on our YouTube page, that explains how remittances and phone calls and these things happen.
Really fascinating stuff. Okay, so let's turn to our audience. Do we have any? I see
The
Sean King has a
second one?
question.
No
Oh,
worries.
sorry.
No worries.
has-
Yeah.
Oh,
The second,
yes,
The
yes,
second
sorry.
question.
Sorry, I was
biggest
eager.
cases, or well, like
Yeah,
what was that like?
sanctions evasion by Office 39.
Yes, I mean the international perception is everything illegal money is related North Korea. I mean Office 39, but it's not true. There are lots of organizations who have a special authority to take a illegal action, and Office 39 is to just bank or safe for Kim Jong Un collecting all the money, and then they distribute it under the Kim Jong Un's order. So that's their role. But there are lots of illegal, I mean sanction evasion cases. So for example, this 2020 December 2020, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned one North Korean entity which called Korea Daejin Trading Company, and then the company has 11 different names. So this is the typical way North Korean regime evades sanctions. If we sanction one company and then that company immediately change the name and registration. At ships also, they change the names of ships all the time. And even if I was sanctioned by the U.S. and United Nations, and then I will change my passport with different names. So it doesn't matter for any North Korean company, North Korean personnel to be sanctioned. So that's a typical way, but that's why U.S. government sanctioned North Korea, imposed sanctions on North Korea from 2017 was the unprecedented sanction. So that was the real sanction. Previous sanctions not sanctioned, in my opinion. So, yeah.
You had the sectoral bans on the big exports, right? Like coal, fisheries. That was the real stuff that hurt.
Probably, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so I saw Sean and then Zainar. Let's take two at a time. So first we'll go to Sean. We've got a microphone coming to you.
Hi. Celebrity defectors attract a lot of attention and a lot of controversy. Have you been attacked or criticized online by, say, people sympathetic to the North Korean regime, by any journalists, or maybe even from other defectors? Thanks very much.
Okay, so let's think about that for a second, and we'll get Zainar's question as well.
Thank you for sharing your story. Earlier, you mentioned market generation or millennials in North Korea and how they have a different mindset compared to previous generations. In your experience, how does this different mindset affect change within North Korea or even lay the groundwork for future change? Thank you.
Super, thanks. Okay, so question number one, any attacks from North Korean sympathizers?
I guess so. I was attacked one time, and actually during the interview with the NK News, I called one organization that is a regime sympathizer, and then regime regard those organizations as a tool of propaganda, and then they are not satisfied my comments, and then they mentioned they provide a statement, I guess, and so what? What's going on there?
I'm trying to tell her the second question.
I didn't quite get the rest of the second part of your question, so I was trying to ask Jonathan, but I want to ask you later. Sorry. Go ahead.
So, I expressed my honest opinion. Nobody cares about their organization, what they are doing, especially North Korean, regime, the authorities. They regard those organizations. I mean, I understand the logic. If we were nice to them, and then we expect, kindness from them, but it's not. Like the regime think those organizations as a tool of the propaganda. Or I know that organization went to North Korea, and then if North Korea has no benefit from that organization, they won't let you in. It's a typical way the North Korean spy or like United Front department operates. So if there is no benefit, you will not be invited frequently or welcomed by the North Korean regime. So, and the way they are carrying out the mission, I found out that is very identical of North Korean regime's claim. Stop joint military exercise, relieve sanctions, and then remove U.S. troops out of Korean Peninsula. So, yeah, we can do that. We can remove troops. We can stop joint military exercise. We can relieve sanctions. What we can change then? How regime change inside of North Korea? Are they going to improve human rights? Are they going to release the prisoners of political prison camp? And then are they going to provide the freedom and freedom of expression movement to the North Korean citizens? I would say no, there's zero chance. Even though we relieve everything and we concess everything to them, the regime's priority is the absolute control of the country. So they won't change, even though we change everything. So I don't think their approach is right approach. That's why I want to make it criticism, but they don't think I was like, being paid to criticize organization. I don't think, I love peace. I want to end the Korean War more than anybody else here because I want to go back to home. I want to meet my friend. So why would I oppose peace? Why I oppose end the war declaration? Because I know the regime's tactic, and then regime wants to utilize that opportunity for their agenda. So, yeah, that's the my response. But so
Yeah.
that's the one attack I got so far. I hope. I don't know. There will be more or not, but yeah.
No more. There won't be any more. And the second question related to marketization producing deeper social changes within North Korea. So how does the new generation's relationship with the marketplace, relying on their own labor, their own hard work, start to make some deeper social changes? Maybe their perception of the government and what its usefulness is or lack thereof, that kind of thing.
So that is really good question, and then something that so I believe different people from different backgrounds have their own opinions, but I think because the society watches its people too closely, especially those people who has some authority to make changes within itself, they can reach out and utilize their authority to a certain extent, and then they wouldn't cross the red line to risk their entire family members. So it is really, I believe that they want to, but that is something that they cannot to do.
So certain limits.
Yeah, certain limits.
Yeah, so again, highly recommend the documentary because in that we have a chance to speak to a number of North Korean millennials and their experiences going through these changes. And so Seohyun kind of described the Changmadang Sedae, the North Korean millennial generation, as this generation that grew up in the 80s, 90s, especially during the famine. And so they don't recall a time when the government really provided to them. And ultimately, that's really what sort of would have produced, or at least for their parents' generation, a certain extent of loyalty to the regime. And so for these young people, they grew up instead in a time where they experienced the famine. They would go with their parents and sit in the marketplace while their moms typically would be doing these types of market activities. And so that's kind of their experience growing up, this sort of camouflage capitalism, you could say, very different from their parents' generation. So what that has done then, especially for urban youth, is then their attitudes toward the government different from their parents in some ways. And this is not, obviously across the board, but again, we would hear these anecdotes time and time again, especially in these areas where either people have been exposed or had more access to the markets or more access to information from the outside world, or where perhaps change was happening at a faster rate. And so these young people, what they're seeing in foreign media is changing the way that they see themselves. And it's interesting because, again, I think one common theme is just that young people are the same everywhere, and it doesn't matter if you're in a completely isolated, closed-off country like North Korea. They're curious, and they are rebellious. And so we would hear these really interesting anecdotes of just young people sort of bragging about, they're not allowed to wear jeans, but they would wear like black jeans, and then kind of with their friends raise the top and be like, and then cover it back up again. And so it's these like small, you could say like 4 acts of dissidence that are not wild and huge and crazy, but to an individual, it's kind of an individual way to express their freedom or to be curious and to be able to sort of do these things, to explore these things. And so some of the young North Koreans we've met were literally like, I wanted to leave because I wanted to wear what I wanted to wear. I wanted to do my hair the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to pursue the things. I didn't see a future in North Korea. And for them, they were so young that they're like, I can't see myself here in this place for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years for the rest of my life. And so I think that for many North Koreans, young North Koreans that we've talked to, were sometimes like the impetus for them in wanting to make that very difficult but dangerous decision to leave.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hannah. I want to take one more in case we have, in the back. We'll have a microphone coming over to you.
Hello, I'm curious about more of daily North Korean life, like in terms of what do North Koreans usually eat as food, leisure time? Is there an art scene? Things like that.
Okay, interesting. And maybe you can contrast American food or South Korean food with North Korean food. That'd be a kind of interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I think typically North Korean people enjoy traditional Korean food, and then based on their environmental level, and then maybe some people just have kimchi and rice. Typically, most of North Korean people have no food material, so they eat a lot of kimchi and rice. But so-called elite class and Pyongyang residents, they have various type of food. And recently, there are lots of restaurants newly built, like hamburgers and pizza, but still it's costly. So not many people can enjoy, and some like young generation, and they purchased and enjoy the food. But I didn't say about the military food quality, but like I would say you will never want to test it. So it was so terrible, but still many people happy with the like full of
just to be
stomachs.
able to have a
just to be
reliable
full.
meal.
Yeah. So
Any other thoughts? Seohyun, how's
So
American food?
how is American food? Wow.
I lived in South Korea for 4 years, and when I got back here, I was like lame. It's all bread, pasta, no good.
Yeah, and unhealthy.
Yeah,
Right?
unhealthy.
Yeah,
It
I
is.
gain a lot of weight.
Mhm.
Yeah, because of American food.
I agree.
But I remember when she went to China the first time, my mom and my sister went to KFC every day.
Oh no.
Because it's a very new, type of food, and then,
Yes.
it's fresh. So young people love hamburgers and pizza.
He's our cultural ambassador, Colonel Sanders.
So my mom and I addict to KFC hamburgers, and we literally went to KFC every day for 2 months.
Oh man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hannah
It
can
is-
Yeah.
it is. And then after I went back to North Korea, I asked my friend who were in China, asked them, whenever you visit North Korea, please bring KFC hamburgers with you guys. It doesn't matter if it's KFC or McDonald's, just bring me hamburgers with you guys. But it was not only me, many those young kids from Pyonghattan, they experience the foreign countries and then they grow up in foreign countries. So they all love hamburgers. And then that's the only thing that the kids who experienced the outside world beg their friends or family members to bring with them.
Oh no, I haven't. I love American food.
All right. Well, I wish we could keep going, but I think we are out of time. So I just want to say a couple quick thanks. You want to ask one? Can it be really, really fast? Okay.
What year did the market economy come into North Korea?
So what year did the Jangmadang start to develop? I think after the Arduous March,
It's
right?
technically not market economy. It's like market, the provided by the government, and then government cannot provide distribution and materials, so they just provide some level of. They allow people to some level of market activity. So technically, it's not market system, but many people think that market can bring changes. I agree with that, but still it is controlled by the Workers' Party of North Korea and the security agents. Then every day they watched what they are selling, how many products they sold, and then how many money they made. So it is all recorded.
So there's literally markets for exchange, but there's no private ownership of property.
Yes.
So you could see how limited the extent of the marketization is.
It's very entrenched, though, and I would recommend. I think there was a report. I want to say it was by CSIS, by our friend Joseph Kim. He had a chance to work on this project that evaluated hundreds of these markets that are like black markets, gray markets, kind of legally state-run and owned markets, things like that. And so, kind of going back to the other point we were making before, the reason why this generation is so important, and it's called the market generation, is because there is so much potential in terms of change that has happened as a result of the markets and what can happen. And one of the things that we see is that when the government could no longer provide for the people and these markets began to, it really was sort of North Korean people hawking their stuff on the side of the street out of desperation to survive. And so really that's where it developed from. But what I think the potential here is, and what's important for us to understand, is that the government has to respond to that. So as people begin to rely on these things, whether it's learning about the outside world or it's accessing technology and information, that's one of the reasons why that's one of the most important strategies that we can invest in and look at in terms of helping to bring more change to North Korea, because eventually it will create so much pressure from the bottom up, as these markets have already done, and it will force the government to have to respond or adapt or change as a result of that.
Excellent. Okay, I've got a lot of people to thank. I want to thank Claire Communications, who helped get the word out. Thank you so much, Claire. I want to thank Irene, who did a wonderful job coordinating all this. Our wonderful intern, Mina, who traveled all the way to Boston for this. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate all your hard work. And then please help me give a big round of applause and hand to Hannah, Hyun-Seung, and Seohyun, who did a wonderful job today. So thanks, everybody. Stick around, hang out with us. We've got some food. Help us.